Welcome to the Republican Professor. Today we have a Easter message. I should say an Easter message. It's Good Friday, 2024. So welcome. Happy to have you with us for this. We have a reflection on Easter and individual liberty. Easter and separation of powers. In other words, Easter and American politics. What I would say is God's work in American politics. What hath Easter to do with individual liberty? And our guest today is Fustel de Coulanges. I don't know how to say his name. He is the author of The Ancient City, La Cite Antique, originally published in French, and I don't speak French, so feel free to make fun of me. This copy is published 1956 by Doubleday Anchor Books. I want to say it was translated by Willard Smith, 1873. So this is a very old book. This was originally published in 1864. Numa Denis Fustel de Coulanges was born in Paris in 1830, and he ended up teaching at the Sorbonne in Paris. He was professor of history, and he specialized in ancient history, Greco-Roman, and later Gaulish history, which I guess would be part of Rome, the Roman Empire, but he specialized in ancient France, which was called Gaul back in the day. And there's a chapter I want to share in this with you about that, well, it connects to some extent with our topic today. And it's about individual liberty in Greece and Rome, or rather the lack thereof. This is chapter 17. Starting on page 219, he calls this chapter the omnipotence of the state. The ancients knew nothing of individual liberty. So let's thank Fustel de Coulanges to be with us today through his writing in The Ancient City, a classical study of the religious and civil institutions of ancient Greece and Rome. The city had been founded upon a religion and constituted like a church. Hence its strength, hence also its omnipotence and the absolute empire which it exercised over its members. In a society established on such principles, individual liberty could not exist. The citizen was subordinate in everything, and without any reserve to the city. He belonged to it, body and soul. Now he's going along and he's citing Plutarch, Aristotle, other names I don't even know how to say. He's citing them in, sometimes he's using the original Latin terms or Greek terms in Latin, in Greek. So bear with me. I'm not going to mention all of the footnotes. It would take too long. I'm on page 220. The religion which had produced the state and the state which supported the religion sustained each other and made but one. These two powers, associated and confounded, formed a power almost superhuman, to which the soul and the body were equally enslaved. There was nothing independent in man, Now we're going to get to the contrast with Christianity in a second, but Christianity and its Jewish ancestors, which Christianity spread throughout the great Greco-Roman world, or I should say Christian missionaries spread, to get my subject of the verb a little bit more exact, changed all this. That's where we're headed, and hence the connection with Easter. Okay. You like how I have my Easter colors here? I got my pastel. Thank you. All right. There was nothing independent in man. His body belonged to the state. It was devoted to its defense. At Rome, military service was due a man till a man was 50 years old. At Athens, till he was 60. At Sparta, always. His fortune was always at the disposal of the state. If the city had need of money, it could order the women to deliver up their jewels, the creditors to give up their claims, and the owners of olive trees to turn over gratuitously the oil which they had made. Private life did not escape this omnipotence of the state. In Athenian law, in the name of religion, the Athenian law, this got small type, as you can see. In the name of religion, forbade man to remain single. Sparta punished not only those who remained single, but those who married late. At Athens, the state could prescribe labor, and at Sparta, idleness. It exercised its tyranny even in the smallest things. At Locri, the laws forbade men to drink pure wine. At Rome, Miletus, and Marseille, wine was forbidden to women. It was a common thing for the kind of dress to be invariably fixed by each city. The legislation of Sparta regulated the headdress of women, and that of Athens forbade them to take with them on a journey more than 3 dresses. At Rhodes and Byzantium, the law forbade men to shave the beard. So he's given these examples of even the things that you would think would be within your personal discretion. That is to say, that you would have autonomy over. Autonomy meaning you're a law unto yourself. Autos and nomos, which is in the term Deuteronomy, the second reading of the law. But nomos means law. Autos means like automobile, self-driving. You would think you would have autonomy and hence discretion over these issues. But no, the regulations were enormously long and hyper-specific. Does that sound familiar? If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you should recognize some themes. And if you don't recognize any themes whatsoever so far, and it's because you haven't been paying attention to the podcast and you want to know what episode in the past would be helpful for you getting up to speed on that, go back to Philip Hamburger's episode in 2022 and listen carefully to it. And if you want to go more into detail, get the daggum book that I'm covering in that episode, because it's all about what we're talking about. And do it yesterday. This is important stuff. The state was under no obligation to suffer any of its citizens to be deformed. It therefore commanded a father to whom such a son was born to have him put to death. This law is found in the ancient codes of Sparta and of Rome, We do not know that it existed at Athens. We know only that Aristotle and Plato incorporated it into their ideal codes. Wow. Page 221. There is, in the history of Sparta, one trait which Plutarch and Rousseau greatly admired. Sparta had just suffered a defeat at Lustra. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce some of these terms. Leuctra? I don't know. Leuctra. Tell me how to say it in the comments, but I don't know how you're going to do that. And many of its citizens have perished. On the receipt of this news, the relatives of the dead had to show themselves in public with gay countenances. The mother who learned that her son had escaped and that she should see him again appeared afflicted and wept. Another, who knew she should never see her son, appeared joyous and went round to the temple to thank the gods. What then was the power of the state that could thus order the reversal of the natural sentiments and be obeyed? He's asking as a rhetorical question. On the deformity and the putting the infant to death thing. That is probably one of the greatest examples of no individual liberty in ancient Greece and Rome. That Christianity changed that. Now, there are some that think of themselves within the Christian tradition that see no problem with abortion or infanticide. They use the term Christian loosely, just as their ethics imply. They're very loose. They're basically pagans. The earliest Christian witness in the Didache forbade that. And for good reason, because, well, should I say? I don't know if I should say yet. Do you know why? Hang on, let's keep going. Page 221. The state allowed no man to be indifferent to its interests. The philosopher or the studious man had no right to live apart. He was obliged to vote in the assembly and be a magistrate in turn. At a time when discords were frequent, the Athenian law permitted no one to remain neutral. He must take sides with one or the other party. Against one who attempted to remain indifferent and not side with either faction and to appear calm, the law pronounced the punishment of exile with confiscation of property. Education. Pay close attention. Let's see if you recognize a theme here. A theme we've covered at length on the podcast with Connor Boyack, the Tuttle Twins guy, with Dr. Brian Ray, with Jessica Wilkinson, homeschool mom, with Heidi St. John. Not like you can see that on YouTube because they took it down, but you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts and so on. Education was far from being free among the Greeks. On the contrary, there was nothing over which the state had greater control. They want your kids. At Sparta, the father could have nothing to do with the education of his son. The law appears to have been less rigorous in Rome. Still, the state managed to have education in the hands of masters of its own choosing. Sound familiar? Aristophanes, in an eloquent passage, shows the Athenian children on their way to school. In order, distributed according to their district, they march in serried ranks through rain, snow, or scorching heat. These children seem already to understand that they are performing a public duty. He's quoting Aristophanes, the clouds. 960 to 965. That's interesting. If you've never read that, I highly recommend you read it at some point. The state wished alone to control education, and Plato gives the motive for this. That's in the Laws, Book 7. Parents ought not to be free to send or not send their children to masters whom the city has chosen, for the children belong less to their parents than to the city. That's a quote from Plato. The state considered the mind and body of every citizen as belonging to it, and wished therefore to fashion this body and mind in a manner that could enable it to draw the greatest advantage from them. Children were taught gymnastics because the body of a man was an arm for the city, and it was best that this arm should be as strong and as skillful as possible. They were also taught religious songs and hymns and the sacred dances and the rainbow sign and flag being hung in the classrooms. Oh, sorry, I added that. Sorry about that. Because this knowledge was necessary to the correct performance of the sacrifices and festivals of the city. Quoting the clouds again from Aristophanes. Wow. It was admitted that the state had a right to prevent free instruction by the side of its own. One day, Athens made a law forbidding the instruction of young people without authority from the magistrates. I guess you had to have a credential. And another, which specifically forbade the teaching of philosophy. Well, now it's on, you SOBs. A man had no chance to choose his belief. He must believe and submit to the religion of the city. He could hate and despise the gods of the neighboring city. As to the divinities of a general or a universal character like Jupiter or Cybele, I don't know how to say that, or Juno, he was free to believe or not to believe in them, but it would not do to entertain doubts about Athene, Polius, or Erectus, or Thesrops. I don't know how to say it, I'm sorry. These would have been a grave impiety, which would have endangered religion and the state at the same time, and which the state would have severely punished. Socrates was put to death for this crime. Liberty of thought in regard to the state religion was absolutely unknown among the ancients. We'll go a little bit more. It's a short chapter, and then we'll cover Christianity and how Christianity and its Jewish ancestors changed this. It's still an issue today. Believe me. All right. So, liberty of thought in regard to the state religion was absolutely unknown in the ancients. Men had to conform to all the rules of worship, figure in all the processions, and take part in the sacred repasts. Athenian legislation punished those by a fine who failed religiously to celebrate a national festival. Maybe we should find people who don't call Christmas what it is. I would be, you know what? I could get behind that, you know. The ancients, therefore, knew neither liberty in private life, liberty in education, nor religious liberty. The same person counted for very little against that holy and almost divine authority which was called country or the state. The state had not only, as we have in our modern societies, a right to administer justice to the citizen, it could strike when one was not guilty and simply for its own interests. Aristides assuredly had committed no crime and was not even suspected, but the city had the right to drive him from its territory for the simple reason that he had acquired by his virtues too much influence and might become dangerous if he desired to be. This was called ostracism. This institution was not peculiar to Athens. It was found at Argos, Megara, at Syracuse, and we may believe it existed in all the Greek cities. Now, ostracism was not a chastisement. It was a precaution which the city took against a citizen whom it suspected of having the power to injure it at any time. At Athens, a man could be put on trial and condemned for incivism, that is to say, for the want of affection toward the state. A man's life was guaranteed by nothing so soon as the interest of the state was at stake. Rome made a law by which it was permitted to kill any man who might have the intention of becoming king. The dangerous maxim that the safety of the state is the supreme law was the work of antiquity. It was then thought that law, justice, morals, everything should give way before the interests of the country. It is a singular error, therefore, among all human errors to believe that in the ancient cities men enjoyed liberty. They had not even the idea of it. They did not believe that there could exist any right as against the city and its gods. We shall see farther on that the government changed form several times, while the nature of the state remained nearly the same, and its omnipotence was little diminished. The government was called by turns monarchy, aristocracy, democracy, but none of these revolutions gave man true liberty, individual liberty. I'm going to read that again. Page 223. The ancient city, Fustel de Coulanges. The government was called by turns monarchy, aristocracy, democracy, but none of these revolutions gave man true liberty, individual liberty. It is a singular error, therefore, among all human errors to believe that in the ancient cities men enjoyed liberty. They had not even the idea of it. They did not believe there could exist any right as against the city and its gods. Reminds me of the pro-gun control people. You know, I'll talk about like cop shows at some point. If you want to. We shall see farther on that the government changed form several times, while the nature of the state remained nearly the same, and its omnipotence was little diminished. The government was called by turns monarchy, aristocracy, democracy, but none of these revolutions gave man true liberty, individual liberty. To have political rights, to vote, to name magistrates, to have the privilege of being archon, that is the ruler, this was called liberty. But man was not the less enslaved to the state. The ancients, especially the Greeks, always exaggerated the importance and, above all, the rights of society. This was largely due, doubtless, to the sacred and religious character with which society was clothed in the beginning. That's the end of the chapter. This is a fantastic book. Maybe I could share with you some of the table of contents. Well, I'll just give you the summary of the book is the role of religion in the ancient world. And some of it's quite surprising to me. I mean, I probably got it covered some point in my undergrad, but didn't stick, like a lot of things don't stick. But I'm going to leave it there. Because I don't want to get too far afield. The theme today is Easter and individual liberty and separation of powers. Christianity changed that. In the creation account in Genesis, God doesn't create society and then individuals. That's backwards. In the creation account, God creates an individual person. And that individual, not society, the individual is created in a specific, and you might say odd or strange or awesome or wonderful mode in the image of God. Now, what does that even mean? It's not that he looks like God. That's not what image means. Because before God took on human form in the person of Jesus, God didn't look like anything. God's not physical in his essence. What does the creation account mean in the image of God? Genesis is specific that not only Adam was created in the image of God, but though Eve was created a little differently than Adam in terms of the material, Eve is created from a part of Adam. Adam is created from the dust of the earth and from a breath of God. And Eve is, but it says in Genesis 1:26 and 27 that both male and female are created in the image of God. That man is created in the image of God, and man means male and female. Noah Webster in 1828 defines the term man in Webster's dictionary, and you can look this up online. Look at man. The very first definition is the gender-neutral definition for mankind. And the example he gives is the King James Bible from Genesis 1:26 and 28. That's the same sense that man is used in the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. It's gender neutral. The pronoun, the third personal pronoun of that gender neutral sense would be he, and that was gender neutral too. You can look in the Constitution of the United States, Article 2, the second sentence. The first sentence of Article 2 is the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Period. The very next word is he. Now, how do I know that's gender neutral? Well, because that's the pronoun for the gender neutral sense of man. By the way, I mean, this is not controversial. I mean, just a few years ago, we had a major presidential candidate from one of the political parties, the one that was pro-slavery, that lost the Civil War. That would be the Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton. She won the popular vote. It never was an issue in the campaign that we should amend the Constitution to put he or she in Article 2. She took it to mean that he was gender neutral. Otherwise, what powers would she possibly have? The President of the United States. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. Period. He. Well, that spells out the powers and duties right there. presumably she thought that she was going to have those he powers, which is evidence that she thought, and all of her voters thought, that that was a gender neutral term. All that to say, okay, go back to Genesis. In the Genesis account, God does not create society in the image of God with the rights and duties, the bearers of responsibilities. No, he creates individual people that are bearers of rights and responsibilities and duties. The very first thing that happens is there's duties and responsibilities. And none of the other things that are created have duties and responsibilities in their creation account. None of them. So in the image of God apparently has, in context, in literary context, seems to imply something about rights and duties. Adam is a bearer of rights and responsibilities and duties. Of course, you have a right to do whatever you have the duty to do, right? And he fails in that regard. And sin enters the world. Now, this image of God, does it passed on to the children? And in Genesis 4, it doesn't explicitly say that, but it seems to imply that it does, because the story of Cain and Abel is there, and implied in that text is that Abel has a right not to be murdered, and Cain has a duty not to murder his brother and a responsibility to not murder his brother, to say the least. He's got more responsibility than that. Not that he accepts it, but that's his sin. And in chapter 5, the image of the image language is presented. It's not the image of God, it's Adam in his image and likeness. But in Genesis chapter 9, the image of God language comes back in the context after the fall, after the flood, and the flood itself was a capital punishment for sin. That is to say, people ignoring their rights and responsibilities and duties to other people, and violating probably the command not to murder. The sin there is mentioned as violence. And Genesis 9 says that not that government has a right to capital punishment, but that people do. Says man does. The same word, by the way, is Adam. It's the same word for the individual man, but it can also mean mankind. And the capital punishment there is for murder. And the reason given is because the victim is made in the image of God. And the person committing the murder is made in the image of God. Individuals are made in the image of God. So the victim has a right not to be murdered. That's an individual right. It doesn't matter what society says. All of society could be against that. They would still have that right. Not to be murdered by another human. And the murderer is created in the image of God and bears responsibility for that, and therefore deserves punishment. And the punishment is death. Now, some Christians don't claim not to believe in the death penalty. I don't understand how you can read the whole Christian heritage and not see the death penalty there. It's there right away. It's there in Genesis 2. The penalty that's promised for eating of the tree, the forbidden tree, is death. It's the death penalty. And that is the penalty that Jesus takes upon himself for our sins. Jesus did not spend life in prison without the possibility of parole for your sins. The penalty was death. And that's a Good Friday reflection for you. But all that is bound up in the same package of individual rights and individual liberty. And the whole point of the American experiment was to say, it sounds a little bit trite to say it this way, but let's give this a try. That's a little trite. Because after all, the earliest Americans went to war to say, let's give this a try. But the movement in history really is that the individual is created. That's in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. And the state is over here. It's not created. Now, God does ordain the state as a post-fall kind of institution, but what does that say about when the state and the individual conflict? That is to say, the state claims that the individual doesn't have the rights and duties and responsibilities that the individual actually does. America tried to make in positive law the best solution to that dilemma, which is to respect individual liberty and to take the totalitarian and omnipotizing features of the state, which are inevitable because of sin, and separate those powers. The whole point of separation of powers is to protect individual liberty. A very good source on this is a guy named Brett Kavanaugh, who wrote about this at length in law reviews and in his District of Columbia Circuit opinions. I read all 306 of them, and I ended up writing a 450-page book called Individual Liberty and Separation of Powers in the Constitutional Statesmanship of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. And this Republican judge, he would cringe if he heard me say he was a Republican judge, but it's true. This Republican judge, that's why they opposed you, Brett. That's why they did what they did. This Republican judge got it right. That's right. You know, look. I mean, I'll link one of his law review articles on this topic in the description below, and you can check it out for yourself. Individual liberty bumps up against the omnipotizing pretensions of the state, and the separation of powers was designed to thwart that. Now, that doesn't mean it did a perfect job, but it does mean that any tendencies to get rid of the separation of powers, which the Democratic Party does, is really going after individual liberty, and it's going backwards. It's not going forwards in progress. It's going backwards to the ancient world that knew nothing about individual liberty. And you can see examples of this in the homeschooling, the public school problems, the credentialing issues, the gun control debate, for example, the COVID-19 fiasco that Josh Hartman, I think his name is. Let me look at, maybe let me make sure. Josh Blackman wrote 2 law review articles in 2021 published on the First Amendment and the Second Amendment against the COVID stuff. Man, you have to check those articles out. I know it's a long read, but you'll get a sense of what we're dealing with here. It's exactly that same theme of the omnipotizing power of society or the state doing whatever the hell it wants, regardless of individual liberty. And that's just not how America was designed. That's not our experiment. That experiment has been run countless times. And it's very old. There's nothing progressive about it. It's very old. And it's interesting. The conservatives are not who you think they are. I don't call myself a conservative. Happy Good Friday.